Hey everybody, what's going on? Today I have a brand new video, and it's a much anticipated video. I've been working hard trying to upload this as fast as I can, so I apologize for the wait. But today we are going to be going through my entire Stephen King tier list from the beginning all the way to the end of all the books that I have read by him. It's a very intense list and I can't wait to get started with it. If you are new to my channel or haven't already, please throughout the video make sure you hit that like button and also subscribe. I appreciate everything that my viewers and my subscribers do with my channel. All of the help that I receive from my subscribers and my constant viewers never goes unnoticed. I thank you very much for sticking with me every video that I do, so it's always appreciative. So without further ado, let's jump right into this, my Stephen King tier list. This tier list I have created, and it is on the tiermaker.com website. If you want to go and check that out, it is up for grabs. Feel free to order these books if you've read all these books like I have. This list is in order of publication. So that's how I started reading Stephen King, was in order of publication. I figured it'd be the best bet to just go right from the start all the way to the end. I started with the first book, Carrie, and then went all the way through his bestsellers until I got to the end where the latest one out, Billy Summers, and I'm excited to read the new one, Fairy Tale, coming out in September. Very excited. But anyways, let's jump right into this. Now, each category, I have brilliant, great, good, okay, and hard to finish. I'm just going to kind of summarize what each of them mean to me. Brilliant means that I couldn't put the damn book down. It was so great. I enjoyed every second of it, and it's top-notch Stephen King. Great means that I enjoyed the characters, the setting. Again, there was times where it was amazing throughout the book, and it was just an overall great book. Good was either the characters, the setting, or the plot was still good, but they could have used a little more like pizzazz maybe at the ending. Stephen King's known for having kind of sluggish endings, so it's an overall good book. Okay, I either maybe didn't like the characters or I didn't like the overall ending of the book. And then hard to finish is just, there's not gonna be many on this part of the tier list, but I finished them, but it was hard because I got lost in certain spots, and most of these ones I will put in the hard to finish started out really good and then just kind of went bad from there on. So let's jump right in this with the number one, Carrie, Stephen King's first published book. Carrie is an amazing story about a teenage girl who is having obviously trouble throughout high school, comes home to a mom who is deeply religious, so she's got a hard life at home and a hard life in school. Carrie White is a misfit teenage girl who comes to realize that she has telekinetic powers and abilities. It starts off really like well, and the characters really flow good together throughout this book. Now, I'm not going to try to say too much of each book because we'll be here forever and I don't want to keep you that long. So I'm going to say a little bit about everything, but overall, I thought Stephen King's Carrie, first book, brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Number two on the list, my favorite all time. If you have not seen my video of my top 10 Stephen King books, I will leave a link in the description below. Check those videos out. My second is Salem's Lot. This is, again, the epitome of a vampire book, and Stephen King nailed it on the head. Ben Meads returns to Jerusalem's Lot, where he actually grew up as a kid, and now he's back to realize that the residents that live in Jerusalem's Lot, or Salem's Lot, they are not who they appear to be. So a lot of things have changed since Ben's been back to Jerusalem's Lot. Ben finds out there's a lot of mysterious things happen throughout the town, but the big part of this book is the Marston house, and that's all I'm going to say about this. But my favorite book, you already know where this is going to go, right up there, the brilliant. We're on to the third published book, Stephen King's The Shining. I've seen the movie first before I read the book, and then after I read the book, I absolutely love the book more than the movie. Actually, a little fun fact, Stephen King bought the rights back to The Shining because he did not like the adaptation of Shining in the movie. The book, though, so much better. It goes into more deeper level of the family. Jack Torrance, a struggling writer and a recovering alcoholic. His son Danny, who has these supernatural abilities. Everything is going together really good in the book. This book is a top-notch ghost story. If you have not read The Shining, I highly recommend it. Now we're starting off with a lot of brilliant. A lot of early Stephen King was amazing and brilliant. So there's gonna be a lot of brilliant stories on this list. Next we have Rage. Rage is actually a Richard Bachman book. So a little bit about the Richard Bachman books. There are 7 of them, and Rage was the first published one. And Rage is actually the only book that Stephen King has taken off the shelf and unpublished due to basically the storyline. There's Rage is about a school shooting, and it's a very, very sensitive topic, obviously, to talk about. So this book is unpublished for certain reasons. The main character in the story takes this class hostage. He kills a couple of the teachers, I believe. But this story, I read the Bachman books. There was a set called the Bachman books, and there's 4 of them in the set. One was The Running Man, The Long Walk, Roadwork, and then obviously Rage. I recommend the Bachman books. The Bachman books weren't a big hit back in the day, but I actually enjoyed a lot of Stephen King's writing under Richard Bachman. So again, Rage is unpublished, but if you can find the set of the Bachman books, I recommend. It's a very sensitive topic, so beware. I'll give you the warning on that one. Overall though, I thought Rage was a good book. Again, it had that sensitive topic about it, so that's why I kind of only put it under the good. Next, we have Stephen King's The Stand, his longest published book. I read the uncut edition, and I believe that was like over 1,400 pages. So definitely a long book, but the characters, there's so many characters. I believe there's actually like a table of contents in this book that actually talk about the characters and the specific parts they play in the story. The Stand is a post-apocalyptic book, and it is really, really good. There are parts where it kind of gets a little slow, but overall, such a great read. I actually loved this book, and again, it was the longest book I've ever read, especially by Stephen King and just in general. The Stand, I am definitely putting that up in great. It was a great overall book, and if you have not read The Stand, if you are up to the challenge of reading the uncut 1,400 page book, feel free to go ahead and do it. I definitely recommend it. Next, we have Stephen King's Night Shift. This is his first collection of short stories, and it's my favorite out of all of his books that he has of short stories. My certain favorites out of these short stories is Jerusalem's Lot. So there's actually a short story in there called Jerusalem's Lot, which is really interesting. The Lawnmower Man, and then Children of the Corn. Now, obviously, if you've seen the adaptation of Children of the Corn, check out the short story if you have not read it. Night Shift, I'm putting that up with great. Again, Night Shift is my all-time favorite short story collection by Stephen King. And he has a few more other good ones out there, but Stephen King's The Night Shift, definitely my favorite. Next, we have another Richard Bachman book. And this is my favorite Richard Bachman book. It is The Long Walk. A group of 100 teenage boys go on a long journey, and they have to keep on walking because if they do stop for any means, bad things start to happen. It is full of great characters. I actually really loved the characters in this story, and they play off each other really well. Long Walk, Richard Bachman book, favorite out of them, brilliant. Loved it. If you have not read The Long Walk, I recommend you go out and check it out. Next, we have The Deadzone. This is our first Castle Rock book. Throughout these books, Stephen King has created different settings that are pretty iconic in a lot of his books. One, Castle Rock, which we'll be talking about a lot. Derry, Maine. There's also a little town called Ludlow, Maine. We'll talk about that shortly. But these settings that he brings into his stories kind of play off each other, and Stephen King's empire, his anthology of true genius. Each book sometimes has a character that reappears or kind of goes back into a different setting, which is really interesting about Stephen King because he kind of ties this all together. Now, personally, I don't know if he meant to do that or if he just was keep going and playing by ear. But again, it was amazing to see that once I was going by publication, book by book, I kept noticing certain settings that keep reappearing and also certain characters that come back into different stories. So definitely interesting. But The Deadzone, first Castle Rock book. Johnny Smith is the protagonist in this story. He falls into a coma and doesn't wake up for 4 years. And then after his coma, he has neural damage, but other parts of his brain actually heighten his sense of ability. So it's a really interesting twist. The characters in The Deadzone are very good, and I like how they work together and how the storyline plays really well. Deadzone went really, really smooth. I never got lost with it. I always sticked with it till the end. So the first Castle Rock book is going on the great list of my tier list, Deadzone. Next, we have Firestarter. Now, obviously, there's the adaptation, and I believe there's a new adaptation coming out this May. But I've seen the original adaptation before I read the book. The book is really good. So a father and daughter are on the run from these certain men that are trying to capture his daughter because she has a very special ability. She has pyrokinesis. So the ability, obviously, to make fire. The intensity and the change of settings throughout the story really engaged me throughout the book, and I kept following it page by page, and it just kept getting more intense by the minute. So Firestarter, definitely a good book overall, and if you've not read it, I definitely recommend it. It's definitely a good read all the way through. Roadwork, another Richard Bachman book. The main character in the story has lost pretty much everything and is trying to keep sane without losing his mind completely. The drastic stuff that he goes throughout this book has really kind of made a really interesting turn. Now, again, this is a Richard Bachman tale. A lot of people either kind of dismissed it, or a lot of people were on board with the Richard Bachman tales. But this one was interesting, and the ending was, well, let's just say it ended with a bang. That's all I'm going to say about that one. But overall, Roadwork, I will definitely say this is a good book. Next on the list, we have a nonfiction book, Danse Macabre. Stephen King has actually written a few nonfiction books. Obviously, majority of what he writes is either supernatural, horror, fiction, obviously, mainly fiction. But there are a few nonfiction books that he has written, and Danse Macabre is one of them. Danse Macabre is actually about Stephen King's influence on writing and the genre text from the 19th and 20th century. I actually want to go back and reread this book because it was a very interesting book to see that Stephen King can write nonfiction and to see who and what he was influenced by to create his writing. Definitely an interesting book. If you have not read it, I definitely recommend it, especially if you are a big Stephen King fan, just like I am. Danse Macabre is a good book. Overall, loved it. His first nonfiction book I read. Definitely a good one out there to go check it out. Next, we have another Castle Rock book, Cujo. Now, if you've seen the adaptation of this movie, it's kind of corny, I think, but the book overall was a great story. I loved Cujo. Sometimes this is a hit or miss with some people, but the settings, they change settings certain times. I really like how Stephen King brings the characters in and actually the involvement they have with a certain setting and certain characters. It's a really great read by Stephen King, and I definitely will put this on my great list. Next on our list, we have another Richard Bachman book, The Running Man. So a falsely accused policeman gets a chance at freedom when he has to actually take part into a game show. But this is no ordinary game show. He actually is on the run for his life. So it's basically a survival game for him, and he has to go all the way through these different kinds of battles. The Running Man wasn't my favorite Richard Bachman book, obviously, but it still overall was a good book and a good read. It has definitely a very, very intense ending. I highly recommend checking out The Running Man if you have not read it. All right, next on our list, I'm going through the Dark Tower series. Now, the Dark Tower series ranges from years 1982, I believe, to 2012. So I'm just going to put them all in a row. That's actually how I read the Dark Tower series, one book and going on to the next. Very intense and amazing series. If you have not read the Dark Tower series, please, I recommend go out. Start with the Gunslinger. That's what we're going to be talking about right now. The Gunslinger is the opening book where you get introduced to Roland Deschain. He is the last gunslinger alive, and he is chasing the Man in Black, or the Crimson King as they call him. Now, lots of people think that the Gunslinger was an okay book, and I'm on board with that as well. The only reason I'm saying it's an okay book was it's the introduction. Okay, so not a lot of things happened in it. You meet, again, Roland, and he comes into contact with some certain characters, but nothing really intense as you get on throughout the series. But it was an okay book. I read it in a day, really quick read. It's an interesting start to the Dark Tower series. Next on the list, we have The Drawing of the Three. This was a brilliant book. So Roland gathers these three characters to join his quartet. The quartet term throughout the Dark Tower series means a group joined by destiny. So you have Jake, you have Eddie, and you have Susannah. And all four of these characters really play a big role with each other on the journey to the Dark Tower. Next on the list, this is my favorite Dark Tower book. It is The Wastelands. If you have not checked out my top 10 Stephen King books, again, the link is in description. Feel free to check that one out. But The Wastelands, true brilliance. The second and the third book were probably my two favorites out of the whole series. On the journey to the Dark Tower, Roland and his quartet come in contact with mechanical bears, rich pirates, and a train that is on a suicide mission. So as you can see from the cover, it is a very intense book. I loved what Stephen King did with this Dark Tower series. I applaud him for it. This anthology, this series is just pure genius, and a lot of people actually enjoyed reading the Dark Tower series as well, especially big Stephen King fans such as myself. Next, we have Wizards and Glass. This is actually kind of a backstory, so we're going in the opposite direction, not towards the tower, but it's still a very good read. This is a flashback talking about Roland's first love and how he became to be the gunslinger, the last gunslinger, and on the journey to the Dark Tower. Backstories, you're either a hit or miss on them. I actually personally loved this backstory. It was interesting, and I thought overall it was a good book. I only say it was a good book because, again, I love backstory, but in the Dark Tower, when I read the drawing of the three and the Wastelands, they're on their journey towards the Dark Tower, and I just wanted to keep going. So this backstory, it took a little break, but overall, the story itself and the backstory of Roland's life, it was a very good read. Next, we have The Wind Through the Keyhole. This book was the last one that Stephen King had published for the Dark Tower series. This book actually chronologically goes in between the 4th and the 5th book, so that's why I have it here on the list. This is another backstory. So Roland and his quartet are gathered around, and Roland is telling a story when he was in his youth that his mother would tell him. And this story is very sentimental. So this other backstory is pretty interesting. Even though we're not going towards the Dark Tower, it's still a very interesting read. And The Wind Through the Keyhole, I'm going to put there right there with Wizards and Glass, right there in the good section. Next, we have Wolves of the Calla. Jake and Eddie go back to the year 1977 in New York to gather materials and things that they need for their journey to the Dark Tower. As the quartet comes back together throughout the story, the quartet is asked for assistance throughout the story by a small town to help protect them from the wolves of the Thunderclap. So these wolves come in, and they're not no ordinary wolves. So this is a big battle scene that goes on, and it's very intense towards the end. And I put Wolves of the Calla in the great section of my tier list. So next we have Songs of Susannah. Following the story of the Wolves of the Calla in the series, Susannah is partially trapped in her own mind by this demonic figure that has overtaken her body named Mia. This has happened after the battle of the Wolves of the Calla, and she is trying to, again, keep herself sane and fight against this inner demon throughout the whole story. And the ending, all these endings in the Dark Tower are really, really good, and Stephen King did an amazing job throughout this whole series. I am putting Songs of Susannah in the great category. And then last but not least, we are actually at the final installment, The Dark Tower. The Dark Tower, a brilliant and amazing read all throughout the end. When I got to the end of the story, I didn't tear up, but it was just sad to see that the journey had finally come to an end. It is a great way to end it. Very heartwarming, and a very intense battle occurs at the end of the Dark Tower book. If you have not read the whole Dark Tower series, please start with the Gunslinger and then work your way all the way through till you get to the final installment, the Dark Tower. You will not be disappointed, especially you Stephen King fans out there. Next on our list, we have a book with 4 novellas in it. This is my favorite Stephen King book that has 4 novellas. Different Seasons has Rita Hayworth in The Shawshank Redemption, Apt Pupil, The Body, which is also known by Stand By Me, the movie. That is a great movie, and The Body was a great story as well. And then last, you have The Breathing Method. My favorite out of these 4 novellas is Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption. I have seen Shawshank Redemption, the movie, an amazing movie with Morgan Freeman in it. It's hard to compare these two, to be honest with you, because the movie was so great, but the book itself was amazing as well. And I'm putting Stephen King's Different Seasons up in the brilliant list. Amazing collection of novellas. Next on our list is Pet Sematary, another classic by Stephen King. The Pet Sematary actually is a real cemetery. A time when Stephen King was growing up in Maine, a group of people showed him a pet cemetery where people would actually bury their dead pets and animals. The way that Pet Sematary is spelled in the book is actually the same way it was spelled out there in Maine, wherever that pet cemetery is. Pet Sematary takes place in a little small town called Ludlow, Maine, and the characters come into this small town and been telling a story where people bury their pets and the pets actually come back to life. And so this is very, very intense. Great group of characters in the storyline all the way towards the end. It will keep you reading page by page. I definitely highly recommend you go and read it. Pet Sematary is going up there right in the great books. Next on the list is Christine. Now, some people actually didn't really like the book Christine, and I've seen the movie obviously before I read the book. I actually love the book way better than the movie. but again, sometimes the book is better than the movie, or the movie might be better than the book. It just depends on your opinion. A love triangle is occurring between 17-year-old Arnie, his girlfriend, and his 1958 Plymouth Fury. This story started off so great, and I just kept reading it all the way through. Great characters, the plot, the ending was amazing. The intensity between Arnie, his girlfriend, and the Plymouth Fury is just amazing. And the love triangle that happens between Arnie, his girlfriend, and the Plymouth Fury is great all the way towards the end. So I'm putting Christine in my great list. Next on the list, we have The Talisman, co-written by Stephen King and Peter Straub. So the protagonist in the story is a young boy named Jack Sawyer, who is on a very intense and mysterious journey to help find a cure for his mother's cancer. Very heartwarming book, and very interesting twists and turns that happen throughout the story. The Talisman was a great read. I love the characters. The way they change settings is really interesting. Now, when an author changes settings, sometimes that's how you get lost, but in The Talisman has a great storyline that just keeps going all the way through. But again, that is my opinion. But overall, Talisman, great book. Definitely check it out. Next on the list is a graphic novel by Stephen King called Cycle of the Werewolf. This book was actually a very good read and very intriguing because, like graphic novels, this is the only graphic novel I've read by Stephen King. I can't think of if he has any more graphic novels out there, but Cycle of the Werewolf, definitely a good read. Definitely putting it up on my good list. Interesting pictures, that's why I made it good. Story was good, made sense. I just thought there could be a little more intensity to it, but still overall very good. Next on our list is Thinner, another adaptation of Stephen King's work. Now, the movie was interesting, but the book even better. So when an overweight lawyer hits a gypsy woman and kills her with his car, he tries to hide the truth throughout it. But then he realized that later on he is cursed because he is gradually losing weight at an unhealthy rate. The ending to Thinner actually was my favorite part about this book. It had a twist to it that I did not see coming at all. So definitely a good read, and I'm putting Thinner up here on my good list. Next we have Skeleton Crew, another collection of short stories by Stephen King. My two favorites in this was The Jaunt and The Mist. Now there is the adaptation out there, The Mist, which was pretty good. And actually I think they did a couple different adaptations, if I'm not mistaken. But the book itself was good, and The Jaunt was good as well. So Skeleton Crew going right here on my good list. So we have a good section of good. Great has a lot. Brilliant. And then I only have one okay. So we're doing pretty good so far. Next on the list, Stephen King's classic and brilliance of a novel, Stephen King's It. I am putting this right here at the brilliant. I believe I put It number 2 on my top 10 Stephen King books. The characters in the story make this book so enticing, and you just want to keep reading it. It is a very thick novel, but if you have not read it, please go read it. The movies are great. I love the 1990 version. It's pretty corny now because the newer ones have more gore and more graphics. I still love it. Tim Curry, props to you out there, man. Any Tim Curry fans out there? He did an amazing job as Pennywise. I loved it. Stephen King's It, the book, great, a classic, and simple and pure genius. Next on the list is The Eyes of the Dragon. The Eyes of the Dragon was actually a great book to me. It is a tale of chivalry, the story of the Knights of the Round Table. And this is a story about Flag, the king's magician. And Flag actually turns up in the Dark Tower series. For those Stephen King fans out there who have read the Dark Tower series, you know what I am talking about. The Eyes of the Dragon coexist with the Dark Tower series, so it's definitely an interesting read. If you've read the Dark Tower series but haven't read The Eyes of the Dragon, definitely go check it out. Next on my list, we have another brilliant book, Misery. Although I love Kathy Bates as Annie Wilkes, and the movie was tremendous and really great, I love the book even more because having a limited setting like in Misery, and there's also some other Stephen King books that have limited settings we'll get to, it's very hard to keep readers engaged in the story with a limited setting. But in Misery, it is a tremendous read, full of suspense all the way to the end. That is why it's on my brilliant list. All right, next on my list. The first one, hard to finish, The Tommyknockers. So this story started off great, and then throughout the book, it got really weird, and I kind of lost place of certain settings, and then it threw me off a little bit. Towards the ending, I kind of gained consciousness of what was happening, but otherwise, it was kind of iffy all the way through. Bobby, the main character, walks in the woods with her dog and trips over this metal object that's sticking out of the ground. It happens to be a protrusion of an alien spacecraft. Personally, my opinion, it kind of went downhill from there and it got really weird really quick. So That's why it was on my hard to finish list. Next, we have The Dark Half, another Castle Rock book. Thad Beaumont, the protagonist, has a very interesting journey throughout this book. He is in battle with his pseudonym. If you do not know what a pseudonym is, it's just another name for an author who he goes onto. So like Richard Bachman is Stephen King. So in this book, Thad Beaumont is actually George Stark. So he's having a battle with a person who is actually not even there. So it's a pretty supernatural book. It's interesting. Some people actually didn't like this. I thought it was great. The twists and turns that happen throughout the story and what Thad Beaumont has to go against at the end of the book was really, really interesting. I recommend The Dark Half. I thought it was a great read overall. Some people didn't like it, but this was interesting because Stephen King wanted to write The Dark Half under Stephen King and Richard Bachman. So it was kind of like a twist of stories in the story, but overall, a great book. Next, we have 4 Past Midnight. This is a collection of 4 novellas. The first one we had was Different Seasons, which is my favorite of the novellas. And then next we have 4 Past Midnight. This one is definitely second on the list of novellas. There's The Langoliers, which is also an adaptation. There's Secret Window, Secret Garden, which actually takes place in Derry, Maine, which I found out not too long ago, which was interesting. The Library Police, and The Sundog. So all of these were very, very good reads, but my favorite has to be The Langoliers. If you've seen the adaptation, definitely read the novella. It's a whole lot better, I promise you. So 4 Past Midnight, overall, definitely a great book. I have a lot on my great list so far, but as long as we keep up in this top tier, even good is like a top tier for me. I would read all these good books again. But great and brilliant, I could read over and over again. Next on the list, another Castle Rock book, Needful Things. This was 10th on my top 10 of Stephen King books. I feel like Needful Things is a very underrated book by Stephen King. A mysterious character comes into the Castle Rock and opens up, if you want to call it an antique shop, a thrift shop, whatever you want to call it. When customers start coming in, the characters don't just buy the items in the store with money. They actually have to pay a favor for the owner of Needful Things. This town actually takes a little turn for the worse throughout, but it's really interesting, full of intensity, full of great characters, and a lot of stuff that happens that you may not even see coming. So Needful Things, definitely a must read. I put Needful Things up here on the great list. Again, this was number 10 on my Stephen King top 10 books. On our list next is Gerald's Game. This is another limited setting book by Stephen King. Now, Misery will never be topped by another limited setting, I think. I have to read more authors, but Stephen King's Misery was amazing. Gerald's Game, on the other hand, it was still a good read. It was an interesting story overall. Jessie, the main character, is basically trapped in this cabin and her husband has just passed away. She is fighting to keep sane and trying to fight away those images in her mind from her past. So there's intensity throughout the whole story, but the setting itself was kind of making it dull a little bit. But overall, Gerald's Game was a good book, and I would read it again. I'm intending to reread more of Stephen King's books. Again, I read them all once. I'm trying to read a lot more content out there too before I reread any of Stephen King's work. So that's why I try to hammer out all Stephen King's work at once. And that way I could just focus on other content. Next on the list is Dolores Claiborne. A 65-year-old is suspected of murder. When she is brought into interrogation by 2 cops, she tells her story right from the beginning and all the way to the end. Now, I think Dolores Claiborne was a brilliant book by Stephen King. I'll put it right down here. My opinion on it being brilliant is because I loved the point of view it was told throughout the story. So Dolores starts within the interrogation room. She is telling her side of the story. She is basically telling her alibi throughout the whole story. And then it goes into the story itself. So I thought that was really cool that Stephen King did that kind of like setup. Dolores Claiborne is a psychological thriller. So if you love thrillers and anything psychological, Dolores Claiborne is the book to read. Next on my list is Nightmares and Dreamscapes. Now, I thought this group of novellas, there's 4 novellas in this, I thought it was okay. I definitely have to go back and reread this book, because honestly, on the top of my head, I can't remember any of the titles. And with the short stories like Skeleton Crew and then ones with novellas like Different Seasons, I can actually remember those titles because they were such great stories. Nightmares and Dreamscapes is okay. I'm sure there was lots of great characters and the settings, but I would just have to reread it again. Next on the list is Insomnia. This book was hard to finish. The book is called Insomnia, but this book actually made me want to sleep a couple of times because the intro started out great, like always, but then I'm starting to get lost throughout the story. A widower, he goes on these walks because he is suffering from narcolepsy. So he can't sleep. So he's gonna go on these walks throughout the night, and he runs into and he sees stuff that only he would see in his nightmares. That part interested me, but again, there's characters coming in, parts were happening that I kind of got lost. If I were to reread this again, it would be a hard read again, but I'm sure I probably missed something. Here's one thing I did miss, and I actually found out about this not too long ago. Insomnia the book, so the solid state book, actually appears in the Dark Tower series. I don't remember that or ever recalling that in the Dark Tower series, but I thought that was a pretty interesting fact. When I go back and reread the Dark Tower series, I'm actually going to look for that. Next on the list is Rose Madder. I thought this was an overall a good book. So Rosie, the protagonist, is fleeing from her abusive husband. Now, when she runs in contact with a painting, she notices that this painting is not just any ordinary painting. She actually gets brought into the painting itself. She's on a journey from escaping from her abusive husband as she is trapped into the painting, and mysterious things start to happen when she's actually in that painting. Overall, Rose Madder, a good book to read. And now we have The Green Mile. Very, very famous film. A great adaptation of Stephen King's work. The book, too, another brilliant book by Stephen King. It was tremendous to read this, and I would read it over and over again. Characters, I love John Coffey. He is the prisoner that is on death row. John Coffey actually has these healing and empathetic abilities. And the death row supervisor, Paul Edgecombe, is really intrigued by John Coffey and his character throughout the book. A heartfelt book all the way through. The ending was amazing. Just like the ending in the movie was great, the ending in the book was even better. I love this, and that's why it's on my brilliant list. The next two books we have kind of go hand in hand together. The first one we have is Desperation. When a tourist couple come into Desperation, Nevada, they find that they run into a kind of like a ghost town. They are on a journey to save their lives as they fight against evil spirits. A very interesting book because it takes place definitely in a different setting. Normally, most of the books that Stephen King writes is either in Maine or along the areas of Maine. This one's all the way in Nevada. And actually, Desperation, Nevada is an actual place. So that was pretty interesting to know too. But Desperation, I thought that was a great book. Very good. It had me all the way from the beginning and all the way going towards the end. Now, the Regulators, on the other hand, I thought this was an okay book. So the book takes place in Wentworth, Ohio, and is about these regulators that actually come into like a suburban area, and then any of the people that are outside their house basically are getting mowed down by guns and getting killed cold-blooded by these regulators. So it's kind of like silly in a way, but there were parts of it that were interesting. But I'm just overall, I think it was an okay book. Very interesting part about this, I don't have these two books or I'd show you. If you were to put the books cover to cover, I can't remember which side which is which, but the books together actually make a whole picture itself. So I thought that was pretty interesting, and I'm definitely going to check it out once I start upgrading my Stephen King collection behind me. Definitely want to put those two books together and check it out. Next on our list is Bag of Bones. This takes place in Derry, Maine. Mike Noonan, a widower, the protagonist throughout this story, has an idea when he has his dream. And then that's when he goes into Derry, Maine to pursue this dream. And then once he starts getting into Derry, Maine, mysterious and creepy things start to happen. Now, Bag of Bones is supposed to be a ghost story. Now, The Shining is probably the best ghost story that Stephen King has written, in my opinion. It's pretty interesting that Derry, Maine and Castle Rock, they both have their similarities, but they have their differences too. Derry, Maine is actually kind of like a town that's kind of cursed, and bad things always happen to it. So like in It, the flooding, and then there's like the fires that happen. And then Castle Rock obviously has its own bad stuff. But in Derry, Maine, so in Bag of Bones, Mike Noonan meets these characters, and as he becomes more engaged with them, mysterious things start to happen, and supernatural stuff also occurs throughout the way. Overall, I get Bag of Bones definitely on the good list, and I love the story overall. The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon. Very interesting story and a different kind of side of what Stephen King usually writes. So a 9-year-old girl, Trisha, is on a walk with her family in the woods when she takes a wrong turn and gets lost in the woods. Trisha is fighting to keep her sanity alive and try to battle throughout the woods to find her family. So it's a survival of the fittest kind of book for Trisha, and interesting that she has this little radio with her too, and that she's using it to actually help her keep herself sane. And it's interesting because she listens to actually a lot of the Boston Red Sox games. This book was definitely one I held in my heart because of baseball. So overall, I put The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon in the great list. And as you can see, our great list is getting pretty big. All right, next on the list is Hearts in Atlantis. I am putting this up at brilliant. Throughout the whole book, there are 5 stories. It takes place from the protagonist point where he is a young boy and then all the way through towards the end. And this is dealing with the Vietnam War era. The adaptation with Anthony Hopkins was a very good adaptation of this book. And I actually saw it before I read the book. But Hearts in Atlantis, if you have not read it, please go read it. It is such a great and heartwarming story. There are parts of it that, it can kind of hit you hard. Again, it's a brilliant read and a brilliant book by Stephen King. Next on the list is Elevation. Elevation is another Castle Rock book, and I actually thought this was a good read overall. A man who is losing weight gradually. Now, not like in Thinner when he's cursed. He's actually they don't know what's happening to him, but he's losing weight. This man brings a town together. The ending was very heartwarming, and it was a very emotional read, but at the end, it definitely hit you right in the heart. So if you've read Elevation, you know what I'm talking about. But overall, it was a good story by Stephen King. Next on the list is Gwendy's Button Box with Stephen King and Richard Chismar. I thought Gwendy's Button Box was actually a great book. This was a quick read. I finished this like in a day and a half, but when Stephen King teamed up with Richard Chismar to make this, and there's also the newer one out, it's called Gwendy's Final Task. I have yet to read that one. I still need to read it, and if I like it, I'm actually going to buy it. Gwendy is on a journey, and she battles through her obesity and her tough times in school, and then she meets this interesting character named Richard Ferris, and Richard Ferris gives Gwendy this box. Well, this box contains a little something that is a little mysterious throughout the book, and Gwendy finds out the hard way what she must do to keep herself sane throughout this book. Very enticing read, very interesting all the way through. And that's why I say Gwendy's Button Box was definitely a great read for me. All right, coming up next is a book called Storm of the Century. Now, a lot of Stephen King fans, I feel like hopefully they have read this book, but this book is pretty uncommon, I think of. I read it again because it was an order of publication, so I definitely wanted to read it. The Storm of the Century, not only just about a storm, but it's about a town that needs to work together against this dark entity that has come into the town. I would have to reread this again, but it was still an interesting read. I like when towns come together and they have to work together against the forces of evil or darkness. But overall, Storm of the Century, good book to read. Next on the list is Dreamcatcher by Stephen King. This is another one that's hard to finish for me. Start off great. 4 friends work together. They do a heroic act and they are rewarded with special capabilities. Now, that sounds amazing, but then as they go throughout the story, weird things happen. I get lost at some points. I don't know who's talking, who's not. It changes back and forth a little bit. If I were to reread this, it would be a hard read maybe again. But the intro of it, I loved it. The characters seemed like they were going to pop out. They were going to do great throughout the whole book. In a way, it started to kind of die down once it got to the middle of the book. So it was a hard finish for me, but that's just my opinion. All right, next we have the sequel to The Talisman. It's Black House with Stephen King and Peter Straub. I personally like The Talisman better than Black House, but Black House is very interesting because it relates to the Dark Tower series and the Crimson King or the Man in Black. That part of the book is what I actually really liked about it, but overall, I thought it was just a good book. The only parts I really loved was that it was relating to the Dark Tower series. Next on the list, I actually have this on the shelf behind me. Everything's Eventual. I believe this was actually my first Stephen King book I bought personally. I'd had it for so many years, but then once I started trying to get through all Stephen King's works, I had it, and I loved this book. So there's 14 dark tales, 11 short stories, and 3 novellas. My favorites in this book were Autopsy in Room 4, The Man in the Black Suit, and 1408, which is another adaptation that has Samuel L. Jackson in it. I like the story better than the movie. Everything's Eventual, going up on the Great List. We're adding more and more to the Great List. If you have not read it, I highly recommend you read Everything's Eventual. Very interesting cover too. Here we go. Another car story from a Buick 8. I liked Christine more than From a Buick 8, but From a Buick 8 still had an interesting twist to the story. Ned Wilcox is a member of Troop D, which was actually the same troop that his father was on. Suddenly after his father had passed away, Ned is trying to put the pieces together, what had happened to his father, and he comes in contact with the Buick 8 that was actually involved with his father. Mysterious things start to come together for Ned as he's trying to put these pieces together. And that's what I really liked about this book was the mysteriousness and Ned solving pieces of a puzzle that he needed to put together. From a Buick 8, overall, good read. Maybe a little more intensity I wish it would have had, but overall, characters were great. They worked great together, and overall, it was a good read all the way through. Next is the first book in the hard case crime novel series. Stephanie, the protagonist, is a journalist, and she is going through what had happened to the Colorado kid. She asked these two journalists, which are way older than her. They had more backstory on what had actually happened, but they have no idea how it still remains unsolved because certain puzzle pieces weren't put together. And basically it's bouncing questions off one another, and Stephanie is trying to figure out and really intrigued on the story of the Colorado kid and the mysteriousness that has not been solved. Out of the hard case crime novels, I would say that Colorado Kid was an okay one. There's two more we're going to be talking about on this list, and by the looks of the list, we are not too far from the end. So we've gone through a big chunk so far, so I hope you're still staying with me. Please, again, if you have not already, hit that like button and subscribe. Your support means the world to me, and I appreciate you guys helping me out through this all the way through. Next is Cell. This is another post-apocalyptic book. Cell on my list, it was okay. It kind of seems silly. So the story happens where people start getting mixed signals on their cell phones, and as they are talking on their phones, they get turned into zombies. Something's wrong with the phone towers, the signals that keep making the people turn into zombies. There's these group of characters that are working together throughout the story, and they're trying to get to this end where all this insanity hopefully will be lost, and then they can start moving on with their lives. Interesting beginning, but again, after that, it kind of was just going downhill. I do love the characters in the story though. Characters are really good, but the storyline, it lacked something in it, so that's why I always just thought Cell was an okay book. Next on our list is Lisey's Story. This is actually another adaptation. I believe it's on Netflix. I could be mistaken though. I have not seen the series, but I have obviously read the book. Lisey's Story is an okay story for me. Lisey, her husband has passed away. Lisey's husband had all this stuff. So when she was packing up all this stuff and getting all this stuff together, she was trying to look through and she was trying to figure out something that wasn't solved and what her husband was trying to figure out. Even though her husband is gone, Lisey is trying to pick up back where her husband left off and trying to figure out certain case. So that was the interesting part of it. But certain characters came in and certain things were happening. And then I just thought, man, it was okay. Interesting beginning. All the Stephen King books I have read, all from this list, have great beginnings. There's never like any of a slow beginning that happens. Once it starts getting to the middle, and then obviously if it has a great ending, it does. But the beginnings that Stephen King has, they're always great. I always enjoy them. Next on the list, another Richard Bachman book, Blaze. Blaze is actually Stephen King's version of Mice and Men. So if you have read that book, then you will understand what Blaze is all about. Clayton in this story is the main character, and he actually suffers from intellectual disability because as a child, he was pushed down the stairs and abused by his father. But Clayton steals a baby from a very wealthy family, and he holds a ransom for the baby from the family. So he is trying to work together and work with his mind. Again, he is not as an intellectual as a normal person is, so it's a battle between his mind and what is going on in real life. This was a very good book by Richard Bachman, or aka Stephen King. Blaze is definitely going on my great list. I could read that book over and over again. It was intense all the way through from beginning to end, and I highly recommend if you've not read Blaze. It is a Richard Bachman book I would read if you have not yet. Next on the list is Duma Key. Duma Key was a good book. It lacks certain parts, but the beginning again and the characters I loved. So Edgar Fremantle, he loses his arm in a construction incident, and then he actually moves down to Florida to talk with his psychiatrist. As he is going through therapy, he finds an enjoyment in painting. And I'm not gonna give too much away about this book, but that painting plays a very big part in the storyline. Next on the list is Just After Sunset, a set of 13 stories by Stephen King. A couple of my favorites throughout this book is Mute and A Very Tight Place. And A Very Tight Place gets pretty intense as you read through it, and the ending I was not expecting, and overall Very Tight Place and Mute were my favorites from this book. I actually wanted to kind of reread this one. It was a great book in general based off those two stories. There are other stories in this book that I might have liked, but I kind of forgot about them, but these two, Mute and A Very Tight Place, are the ones I actually remember really well from Just After Sunset. Next on the list is a mammoth of a book, Under the Dome. Now, Under the Dome is a series, if it's still on Amazon Prime. I had watched the series, but I had never finished it. So when I read this book, it was very interesting because if you ever watch something and then you read the book, you kind of visualize what the characters look like. Well, that actually helped me. Even though I never finished the series, this helped me read the book Under the Dome. Under the Dome was a great read. As a town gets trapped under this dome, they are fighting together. They are going against each other. It is just all hell and chaos. But there's a supernatural part about this book that is underneath the dome. And certain kids work together and try to figure out that puzzle. So it's very enticing, very intriguing. Lots of characters in it. So again, this has another table of contents in it. Kind of like how The Stand was. Under the Dome has table of contents with the characters and the setting. Overall, it was a great read. I highly recommend Under the Dome. Next, we have Full Dark, No Stars. There's 4 stories in Full Dark, No Stars. My favorite being 1922. 1922 was another adaptation that was actually on Netflix. I don't know if it's still on it. I've watched it once. It was okay, but I actually liked and understood the short story better. But the story 1922 and Full Dark, No Stars was actually a really good read for me. And that's why it was my favorite out of the stories. Full Dark, No Stars, I give it great. Mainly probably because of 1922, and the other ones were in there. I think there was one of them I did like too. Not as much as 1922, but I thought it was still a great one. So that's why it's on great on my list. Another mammoth of a book, 11/22/63. Jake Epping, the protagonist, goes back in time, actually to Derry, Maine, and tries to start a different life to work his way to try to stop the assassination of President Kennedy. It's a thick book because it takes a while to get there, but in the process of it getting to the ending, it was very good. Now, lots of books that take a long time to get to something. Sometimes, like especially with like either Tommyknockers or Insomnia, where I just didn't care for it. 11/22/63 was one that I just kept going with it. It was hard to put it down, and that's why it is on my brilliant list. If you have not read 11/22/63, please go read it. I highly recommend it. You will enjoy it. Next, we have the second installment in the hard case crime novels, Joyland. Now, Joyland was a very interesting read. I liked it more than The Colorado Kid. I still will put Joyland at good. I followed the story a lot better in Joyland than I did in Colorado Kid, but it was interesting when a boy, he is working at this amusement park over summer to earn some money. Mysterious things start to happen. Creepiness, hauntedness. It's known that there may actually be a ghost haunting the carnival throughout the book. So this character, he is working together with a couple staff members, and it's pretty interesting. And again, overall, it was a good book to read through and through. Next on the list, the sequel to The Shining, Dr. Sleep. So Danny Torrance is all grown up now, and he is going on his own journey to save this little girl who has the same supernatural abilities that he had back when he was in the Overlook Hotel growing up with his father, Jack Torrance. So he needs to use this ability and to find this girl to save her and protect her from a cult called The Knot. Now, this is a ghost story. The Shining I loved way more than Dr. Sleep, but it was a really interesting read to see Danny all grown up now, and he is going through his own battles, kind of like how Jack Torrance, his father, did. So that's what I really enjoyed about Dr. Sleep. But overall on the list, it was a good book. It wasn't as good as The Shining, but overall, I would read it again because it was solid. Next, the first installment in the Bill Hodges series, Mr. Mercedes. Bill Hodges, a retired detective, works with a couple groups of characters who actually make a very heroic bunch and a very heroic team to try to stop a killer named the Mr. Mercedes Killer. Now, there's 3 books in this series, and Mr. Mercedes is going right up at brilliant. This is a straight crime novel. Stephen King's very good at writing crime novels, and I love his supernatural stuff more, but his crime novels are very top-notch. So if you have not read a Stephen King crime novel, I definitely recommend starting the Bill Hodges series, starting with Mr. Mercedes. Next on the list is Revival. This story shows the life of Jamie Morton, starting as a young boy all the way up to his adulthood. He becomes interested and very fond of a minister as a young child, but as he grows older, he realizes this minister has been keeping very, very dark secrets from when he met as a young boy to now when he's in his adulthood. And I thought overall Revival was a great book, and I definitely would recommend it, and I would read this one again. The second installment to the Bill Hodges series is next, Finders Keepers. So this is the sequel to Mr. Mercedes, as it is the second book and second installment in the series. This story is about the murder of a famous author, John Rothstein, and his mysterious notebooks that went disappeared, and they were actually worth a lot of value. So as Bill Hodges works with his heroic group of people, there's another side that is going against Bill Hodges and his help. This is what ties the book together, and this is what makes it another great crime novel. I put Finders Keepers. I liked Mr. Mercedes better, but Finders Keepers was still a great book, another great crime novel by Stephen King. Next on the list is Bazaar of Bad Dreams. This is a collection of short stories, and this collection of short stories was okay, but the one that I really did love out of this was Blockade Billy. So the overall book itself was okay, but as you can see here, I took out, and this is Blockade Billy. I told you before, I'm a baseball fan, so anything about baseball I'm going to love. Blockade Billy was a great story. So that is why it was my favorite, but the book overall was just okay. But I may have to go back and reread it again. Now we have the third and final installment in the Bill Hodges series, End of Watch. So Bill Hodges is diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and he has to still work with Holly, which is one of his sidekicks, to solve this murderous crime. End of Watch being the last part in the series, I thought this was a great book, a great finish to the series. Again, you know, with Bill Hodges having pancreatic cancer, I'm not going to say what happens, but definitely a very strong finish to the series. Next on our list is a book called 6 Scary Stories. This is edited by Stephen King, so he actually didn't write these stories in this. These stories are ones that actually made Stephen King scared himself. So that was a very interesting note. And that's why I wanted to read this, not only because it's in order publication, but I wanted to read it just to figure out what scares Stephen King. There were interesting stories, but overall, there were some good ones. There's, I think, one maybe great one, but the rest of them were just okay. So I actually just put this over on the okay list, because there was a couple one I liked, but then overall, everything was just average. But it was interesting overall to see that Stephen King was putting in 6 stories that he found himself to scare the living, you know what, out of them. So that was what was interesting. Next on the list is a collab between Stephen King and his son, Owen King, Sleeping Beauties. So when women start to suffer from a horrific sleeping disease and they can't wake up, their face becomes covered with a webbing, kind of like a spider webbing that's covering their face. So this is when it's getting very strange for the husbands and the men in the town, because all of their wives or all the women are falling asleep and they're not waking up. Until this one character comes in. Her name is Eve. Now, as the men can see that she is not falling asleep to this disease or this curse, so they actually capture her and they're kind of like interrogating her. But once the story goes through, it is an interesting story. There are parts where I kind of got lost, but again, it started off really good. But overall, Sleeping Beauties was a good read. I may have to go back and read this one as well. We'll put it down here. Next on the list is a book written by Stephen King and Bev Vincent, which is called Flight or Fright. This collection of stories is a horror anthology, all stories taking place on an airplane. There are some interesting stories in this book, but overall, it was an okay read. Again, it was a collab, and it was a very interesting point of view that Stephen King and Bev Vincent were writing about. Next on the list is The Outsider. This is also a series. I don't remember what it's on. It may be Hulu or another kind of streaming channel. Terry Maitland is the main suspect in this book when the body of an 11-year-old boy comes up dead, but Terry has a very strong alibi throughout this book. As he is under interrogation and as he is the prime suspect, he has an alibi and shows his alibi. What is mysteriously lurking out there that is taking advantage of Terry's life? And what could this mean for Terry in the end? So very interesting ending towards it. It could have been better. So The Outsider, though, was a good book overall. I followed it really well. The ending kind of just, was a disappointment. But next on the list is The Institute. Now, personally, I thought The Institute was a brilliant book. That's just my opinion. But I thought The Institute was brilliant because there's part of it where really set it off first was that it takes place in a city where I actually was born from. So I thought that was pretty cool that Stephen King actually put that in the story. And then the characters throughout this, and when they get to the Institute and they make friends with each other, like it's a very interesting and a survival book for these kids. This book is about a young boy named Luke, and he's actually kidnapped and brought to this institute. But this institute is not for any normal children. These children have supernatural abilities. These children have telekinetic and telepathic powers throughout the institute. So the institute is trying to use these powers that these kids have, but these kids are going to say otherwise. So it's a very awesome read. It's intense all the way through, and I highly recommend. If you have not read The Institute, please do. I have a very good friend who recommended for me, and I'm very glad she did. It was a very great read from start to finish, and trust me. All right, everyone, final 3, here we go. Next on the list is If It Bleeds. So from what I heard from people reading If It Bleeds, they kind of gave it negative feedback, but I actually thought this was a great book, mainly because Holly Gibney comes back, and Holly was actually in the Bill Hodges series. So again, these are where the characters are coming back and reappearing in different stories. Through Stephen King's whole collection of books, you will see those similarities, not in every book that he writes, but you will see the connection between the characters and the settings, and that's what's really interesting, and that's why I love reading Stephen King, because bringing characters back, just like he did Holly and If It Bleeds, is a really great way to grab my attention and to make me keep reading all of his work. All right, 2 more, everyone. Thank you for sticking with me. We're almost done. Next on the list is Later. This is the 3rd installment in the hard case crime novels. This was my favorite out of all of them. This is another crime novel. The whole series as a set is all crime. But in Later, there's a tad of a supernatural genre mixed in with it. And I actually really enjoyed this one by Stephen King. I'm going to put Later up in the great. And now we are finishing this tier list with the last book that he is out right now. Billy Summers is another crime novel. And it's interesting because this is about a hitman who is on his last task before he technically retires, if you want to say that. But on this task and on this hit, he is actually trying to prevent it because of certain reasons. So he is on a journey with this person as they are getting chased and their lives are at stake because he is trying to stop something that he brought all together from the beginning. So very interesting, enticing story all the way through. I did enjoy the ending. Billy Summers overall was a great read, and I definitely recommend it if you have not. So there is the list, everybody. We have gone through Stephen King's list of bestsellers, certain ones that are not bestsellers, the Richard Bachman books. Ranking all these stories was actually a really fun time. I enjoyed this, talking about each and every one of the books that I have read by him. It was a lot of books. I enjoyed the journey of reading them, and I'm going to enjoy rereading a lot of these. Again, this tier list is on tiermaker.com. If you want to check out the list of Stephen King books, you will find this list. If you have read all these Stephen King books just like I am, please comment. If you have not read all the Stephen King books, I would still love to hear your feedback. I would love to hear your comments. What did you think about this tier list? Would you disagree on anything? I would love to hear anything you have to say about this tier list about Stephen King. Stephen King is still my favorite, and I am very excited for when he comes out with Fairy Tale in September. I believe it's September 6th, but I hope it's going to come out sooner. All right, everyone, that is it. My entire Stephen King tier list from beginning to end. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please leave in the comments below what you thought about the video. Any of the books that you have read, please leave that in the comments as well. Talk about the differences, the likes or dislikes of Stephen King. I will always comment back to my viewers. Before you go, I must say, always, and I do mean always, read your book cover to cover. We'll see y'all later.